So I want to make a little video about the shadow, so about the shadow work, and especially how that applies to someone who has been through some of these deeper awakening shifts. Okay. So, and I'm not gonna go more into those. So whatever your shift has been, it could be this deep and thorough seeing, that there's no separate selves, there's no any kind of self, there's no subject, there's no object, everything is completely empty, of the kind of identity that used to appear to be there. So there can be this very, very thorough emptying out, as it feels like, of the constructed sense of identity and of any kind of psychological entity or any kind of even spiritual identity into this total nothingness. So that's one insight that can happen, one awakening insight. Or it could be something more related to the sense of unifying oneness and the underlying interconnectedness of all phenomena, all sensational experience, that nothing is actually solid and nothing is actually fixed and existing on its own. So the sense of separation and the identity built around it, it can also dissolve in that way, into this very all-encompassing sense of undivided whole. So when this happens, when we have these deep awakening shifts, it can really feel like for quite a while that the conditioned identity or the constructed identity and any kind of conditioning, it's gone, because it's just the way the awakening tends to happen when it really goes all the way through, that you just have this realization of the absolute, and it's so pristine and it's so clear, and it feels like anything else was just a passing blip, like a fragment of a dream, like illusion, and this is real, and it's more real than real in a way, even it's unreal in its own way. And it can really feel like it's all gone, like who you thought you were, everything you thought you were, what the world was, what life was. And some people very even viscerally experience that the person that used to be there, it's gone, and now it's just this empty looking, like this unborn vastness looking, and experiencing itself and kind of birthing itself, being born. So it can be very, very surprising then and unexpected when this shadow material starts to move through. Okay, so it can take a while. For some people, it can take some weeks, some months. For some, it can take years. But sooner or later, if you're really authentic with your realization, this unconsciousness is really going to just start to almost like overflow, because that's what the constructed identity, that's what the separated sense of self was. It was a kind of artificial way of dividing the experience, like conscious, unconscious, and in so many ways. So the unconsciousness was kind of like repressed largely. And now when that identity structure is not there anymore to manage the experience, to create these inner divisions, artificial divisions, all of this just naturally starts to come forth, so to speak. And what usually happens then is that we tend to think that something has gone wrong, okay? It can feel like the awakening clarity, and all these positive effects that it comes with, like expansiveness and joy and bliss and unconditional love and beauty and all of that. It's that can feel like, okay, I'm losing that because this shadow material is now moving through, and there can be all kind of emotions, like that are that our conditioned mind is saying that are negative and that are not related to realization. Such emotions like, unworthiness or shame or anger or rage or boredom, or like so many things can really start to surface. Grief is usually acknowledged in non-duality, but a lot of this other stuff is not. It's considered something other than realization, and there's a lot of conditioning in spirituality that is basically telling you that if you have these deeper shifts, then magically all of this stuff should just be wiped out, gone, and you're never going to experience it again. And I think it's really subtle in a way, because I didn't even realize how thorough this conditioning was from spirituality towards the shadow, that is something other than awakening. And if it arises, it's something to work through, to something to deconstruct, to dissolve, to get rid of, almost like as efficiently as possible, so you can get back to the real awakening, which is idealized as some sort of perfected state where nothing arises from the past persona, or nothing arises, of these remnants of that can appear like a state of separation or some sort of fixation. And in my experience, that's just total bullshit. It's just not true at all. Like, the deep realization is nothing like that. It's not some sort of magical escape out of the human experience. And for sure, for a while it can feel like, and it is like, the absolute is so immersive. It can very much feel like the relative human, it's very insignificant, or it's almost like not even there, or it's nothing other than this absolute non-arising, non-ceasing, acausal, empty fullness, in whatever way you experience that. But sooner or later, the relative is gonna balance itself out by really calling attention into itself, and that's just natural. So we have this, we go to the deep end of the realization, into the realization of the absolute. So it is gonna be balanced then by the relative, and there needs to be this very, very thorough and complete integration between the two, and fusion, So I think this is maybe the most, what causes most problems at this phase, is that when the shadow appears, we tend to think that it's something other than awakening. And because we think that it's something other than awakening, there's going to be a resistance towards it. Because the system is just naturally going to want to hold on to the initial, explosive beauty of the awakening. It's just naturally going to want to do that, and then it's going to resist the shadow as long as you think that it's something other than it, something that you need to kind of fix in order to get back to the awakening. Because the shadow in itself is actually not a problem at all, interestingly so. The unconscious material is not a problem at all. The only thing that causes discomfort and even intense suffering at this phase is all these ways that the system is still trying to push it down, to repress, to resist, or to hold on, whatever it is that you're holding on, like your idea of what awakening is. That's usually very common way our system is trying to hold on at this point and fixate, is trying to hold on to awakening as something particular, something it can understand that this is what awakening is, and it should always be like this, and if it's not, then I don't know what it is, and that's very threatening. This ungraspable quality of direct immediacy of the realization, which is very fluid and kind of like a shape-shifting. So for the conditioned mind, that's going to be threatening. So it wants to kind of get a hold of something that cannot be grasped or held on to. And then it's going to try to feed the awakening to different views and try to understand it in so many ways. And it's just never going to work out. And one of the ways it's going to try to manage the experience is that when the shadow moves through, that it's something that needs to be managed now, I need to do shadow work, so to speak. But even that expression is total nonsense, because if you've had deep realization, you know that the doership is not really there, and it's seen that it never was there. So it's just like happening, and it's very immersive. So calling it shadow work, it's a little bit misleading, because in many ways you don't have a choice. Like the shadow rises and the system responds, and there is going to be this natural compassion and unconditional love that is very much born because of the shadow, actually, because the shadow material arises, and eventually it will give rise to the unconditional love and compassion in our experience in a very authentic and genuine manner. It's very different kind of compassion that, a self experience is like kind of like looking into the suffering kind of from a subtle position of superiority. So this is nothing like that. It's not that kind of compassion. It's just this kind of unconditional and organic and spontaneous responsiveness to whatever arises, that doesn't see it as anything. It doesn't see it as good or bad. It doesn't see it as enlightened or unenlightened. It doesn't see it as something that needs to go away. It doesn't need to see it as anything whatsoever. It's just unconditionally kind of organically responding to it. And there's this very beautiful, integrated experience that can start to be more and more your lived reality. When we really realize that whatever arises, it arises as awakening. It arises as awakening. So it's your awakening arising there in the form of a shadow. So you don't need to fix it. You don't need to work through it to get back into the awakening. No, it's awakening arising as the shadow. So it rises as total perfection. It's nothing needs to be fixed there. So there's tendency to fix or heal in a sense that when something arises, you need to do something about it in order to be whole, in order to be integrated. I think that's misunderstanding, ultimately. I mean, it makes sense that the certain phases of our journey, when we still experience some sort of sense of self, so there is still a sense of time, so it still makes sense to think things in those terms, that if I do this healing work, then there will be some sort of state of integration. But that actually doesn't make sense from a lived experience from the Absolute, which means that everything arises uncaused and spontaneous. So it arises as perfection, and that applies to everything. That applies also to a sensation of like contractedness or tension or uncomfortable thoughts or a sense of shame. Whatever it is, you don't need to analyze it. You don't need to understand it. You don't need to deconstruct it at this phase. I think that's not the most skillful approach to shadow, is to try to deconstruct it and dissolve it away. I think like what's really, really called for is unconditional love, but authentically, and compassion, so giving birth to those, or kind of discovering that that's actually the nature of the Absolute. It has that energetic capacity, so to speak, like love and compassion. And secondly, you really, really, kind of when you see that that this idea that if something arises and you need to do something about it for it to be whole, it arises from a sense of wrongness. That there's still a subtle sense of wrongness, belief in wrongness, and that's causing the discomfort, that's causing the resistance. So if there's a sense of contractedness that is there, there's this subtle sense that something is now wrong about it, that it should go away. And that's going to keep us in this loop, of kind of illusion of resolution, because resolution in this sense is always implying time, that now there is something that is bound and fixed, and at some other moment in time it will unravel, but right now it's not resolved, so it's unresolved. So that's already giving the message, if you kind of think in these terms, that of temporal reality, of time, and then you're going to be stuck there with this so-called unresolved thing. But if you really look into anything, like any sensation, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how contracted it feels, well, first of all, is it actually there as an actually real thing? So that's this living realization of emptiness, that even if there's contraction, you can kind of spontaneously and naturally know, and it's not knowing in any normal sense, that hey, it's not like actually there, it's not actually happening, I can't locate anything real there. But it's not a denial, it just opens up this tremendous spaciousness in whatever seems like something, reified and solid. It's not actually static. It's very dynamic, the experience, whatever it is. Even contraction or boredom, you can discover this very, very subtle energetic pulsation there. Okay, that's what it actually is. That's what any sensation is. So nothing needs to go away like this when you just feel into the experience. And you have this living realization, so it's going to show you that there's nothing solid there, there's nothing static there, there's nothing confined there, there's nothing actually existing, like something locatable. And it's going to eventually show you that whatever arises, it must arise as total perfection. It must arise, and this, it must arise as total perfection. And this total perfection is incomprehensible for the mind, because it's not rightness versus wrongness. So it's not like, oh, my experience is right exactly as it is, because a sense of rightness only makes sense if you have a sense of wrongness. Okay, so if you're kind of trying to work through the shadow with this idea that, oh, it arises and it feels like there's something wrong with it, and now I'm going to try to turn it around and see that it's actually right. It's like operating within a paradigm, and which is never going to kind of resolve. So that's actually what you want to see when the shadow arises. You want to see through all these dualistic pairs, right? Like rightness or wrongness, for example. Unresolved and resolved, anything really. And this is how you go deeper with the realization through the shadow, by seeing through these apparent opposites in so many different ways. This is actually like emptiness in a living, dynamic way, exploring itself. So it's not about kind of applying a non-dual overlay on experience, like kind of trying to make it empty, so you can get back to the real awakening, kind of trying to get rid of the shadow by trying to see how empty it is. So that's just a subtle way, of course, and not even that subtle way to, manage, control, fix, get rid of, resist, and so on. So the unconsciousness is never the problem, and not only it's not a problem, but it's actually a huge source of vitality. It's a huge source of vitality, because this enlightened display, or the luminous display, is actually sustained by this mysterious, deep, dark, thick, but empty, formless quality of the unconscious. Like in a similar way than the lotus flower is sustained by the mud. Okay, so that's why it's so insane to try to get rid of the unconsciousness, try to empty it completely out, to try to get rid of the shadow, to try to fix the shadow, and then abide in some sort of awakening, which is seen as some sort of perfected state where nothing ever arises. Like, this is a horrible idea. I think it's a violent idea, and at least in my experience, it was causing tremendous amount of angst. So when I discovered that it's actually a conditioning, it's just a conditioning, and I was like, wow. And then it was gone, and I could suddenly, and it's been like that ever since, to just viscerally feel how whatever arises as perfection. So the shadow really arises as perfection, even if it feels, whatever it feels like, it doesn't even matter, It's weird. So if you just decide this experientially. You see it and you just decide that whatever arises as perfection, arises as inherently clear, inherently, you could say, empty, inherently pure. Then nothing needs to be done. No remedy is applied. And then the release is inevitable. It's just the way reality moves. It's self-releasing like that. So when you completely give up control, there's actually this incredible state of natural flow that takes place, and everything is perfectly managed. So you never need to get rid of anything. You never need to try to do anything about anything, ever. You completely give that up, and that's pretty much the secret to the shadow, like from this perspective of deep realization, in my opinion at least, or one of the keys to it, because the shadow is actually, it can be experienced in a very non-dual and fascinating and immersive manner. It's just this total co-creation, how the unconsciousness is kind of projecting itself, and the apparent exterior is never anything actually exterior. You're always in some way in some sort of co-creative relationship with yourself, even when you interact with so-called others. So it's not something you want to get rid of. It's a very powerful, it's a power. It's a creative power. Okay, and so the only thing that causes suffering here ever actually is the tendency to push and pull, is the tendency to divide, is the tendency to disown, to reject, parts of ourselves that we think that shouldn't be here, and they're not really even parts of ourselves, because there's not really even us there, in any kind of, actually existing thing. So it's just these conditioned patterns in our system that are rejecting and disowning certain psychic energies, because they are socially and culturally conditioned as not desirable, like spiritually conditioned as not desirable. So and so when that conditioning is seen for what it is, it can naturally release. Again, you don't try to get rid of anything. That's just the way natural release works, that when you see something for what it is, when you see conditioning for what it is, it's released. And you can kind of see that you've been turning away from yourself. Like whenever you reject something, you reject yourself. Whenever you disown something, you disown yourself. Also, whenever you try to grasp on something, that act of grasping on something, it prevents you to be fully present for what is. So it's just a kind of form of resistance. Like grasping and holding is always grasping and holding on a version of reality that could or should be something other than it is. So it's an idea, it's an expectation, or it's a memory, or whatever it is. So it's, and this holding and grasping then is simultaneously resisting that whatever is right now, what is the absolute mystery of what arises right now, is all there is the totality of it. Nothing needs to be done about it. Nothing needs to be extracted or added to it. Nothing can be extracted or added to it. Nothing needs to be fixed. No remedy needs to apply. There's nowhere to go. There never was anywhere to go. There's nowhere to arrive. So what is arises as the totality of perfection. It's crazy simple like that, but for that tendency of control, which can be so deeply rooted, and it definitely operates also after deep realization, it doesn't just magically fall away. That's gonna look like a total death, basically, and encountering directly in our experience that subtle sense of control and fear in whatever way it's still appearing. That's the gateway. That's the gateway to truly integrated realization, to truly This and what I call integrated realization is not some sort of perfected state where shadow never arises, or something from the so-called a personal self like never arises. So what I call integrated state is this there's total lack of resistance. There's no hindrance whatsoever in the way the wholeness is moving. Like this pushing and pulling, it just totally gives into this incredible flow state, where there is this constant kaleidoscopic shifting, that reality, which is you, kind of experiences itself in so many ways. Like in one moment you can feel how absolutely empty everything is. There is no emotion whatsoever, just total cessation, no thoughts. It's like, whoa. And the next moment is just the experience of the person, apparent person, the someoneness arises, and you can just feel these psychic qualities and the specific patterned way that you exist as an individual, and whatever problems or sorrows or joys it has at the moment, and it's totally no problem. There's no need to grasp on the emptiness, and now it's suddenly someoneness, and then the someoneness can then shift into this total just sense of aliveness, how any sensation of the so-called someoneness, of being someone, is actually just this very fluid and dynamic field of energetic potentiality, which is instantly releasing into itself, is not really even happening. And so the someoneness is totally releasing into this dance of pure potentiality, and then that can then suddenly give rise to this incredible just heart opening, where you just feel like, oh my god, it's just total love, and you just feel your heart opens, and it includes everyone, like your friends, your enemies, like everything is just so permitted. And so that's the kaleidoscopic nature of reality, that it can just really experience itself and look into itself and explore itself with this total fluidity and non-fixating nature, where you don't need to hold on to any one way of seeing things, that this is it, You don't need anymore to say that this is what awakening is, or this is what I am. You can just be one thing, and then another thing, and then another thing, and it's never really a thing, but you don't really even need to worry about it anymore. It can just constantly shift. There can be this total, very paradoxical fluidity about it. And then you can really see, when this starts to happen, that the only thing that was ever causing suffering or discomfort was the tendency to try to fix reality or identity to be something particular. That's it. It's never a problem to be imperfect human being. It's a problem if you have an identity of awakening that you need to be some sort of highly evolved being, who never experiences human messiness. Yeah, then it's a problem when the human messiness arises. But if you don't have any identity whatsoever, then it's just like, wow, this is how reality is arising at the moment. It's incredible. It creates itself as this apparent human messiness and this apparent desperation. But if there's zero resistance, zero holding on, zero indulgence in it, it just moves through. The next minute it's gonna be something else. Next minute you're gonna look at the flower and it's like, whoa, the whole universe is in the flower. It's like, wow, then you're just a flower, and the flower is like everything. So, or whatever else. Or maybe you're just, doing some more practical things than looking at the flower, but it doesn't matter. So my point is that it's such a relief. I would really, that's why I want to emphasize this so much, that this whole awakening and realization is not about becoming some sort of perfected being. It's just insanity. It's just going to cause you so much stress and angst if you hold on to these ideas, and they are just conditionings. They're just conditionings. So whatever arises, it arises as perfection in your experience. You are perfect as you are. You really are perfect as you are. And that doesn't mean, that at the human level, at the relative level, there cannot be improvement, like if there are certain ways of acting, that are harmful for yourself or harmful for your relationships. Because that's also just the nature of this self-aware, kaleidoscopic, super aware and not aware at all reality, unreality, that when you see true stuff, when you self-reflect, there is going to be natural growth also. So just because everything arises as perfection and we are meeting the shadow in this way, it doesn't mean that there's not going to be then growth and change, because there actually then can be growth and changed from this place of total it's even beyond acceptance. It's like you go beyond this acceptance and rejection regarding the shadow, because even accepting implies some sort of something or someone who's accepting, or some sort of act of acceptance. No, totality just arises as perfection. You can try to accept it, you can try to reject it, it doesn't matter. Anyway, it will arise as how it arises. But it arises as a gateway for the awakening to deepen into itself. So whenever you turn away from it, you're turning away from awakening, whatever it is that you're turning away from. Whatever arises, it arises as enlightenment. If you reject it, you reject enlightenment. But that rejection also is enlightenment. So it's not a problem. There's really no problem at all, because everything is enlightenment. And from another point of view, everything is conditioning. So rejection, okay, conditioning. Then you become aware that, oh my God, rejection is conditioning. Well, that's also conditioning. Okay, that you suddenly have this apparent self-awareness, and so on and so on and so on and so on. So it's all just display of conditionings, mysterious causes and conditions, which is just another name for enlightenment, for the natural enlightenment that can never be anything other than what it is, and it's not anything particular. Okay.